2020 has been a year like no other. It began with continued grumbling about Brexit and the emergence of devastating bushfires in Australia, which we thought might be the defining issues. Meanwhile, of course, the relatively unknown city of Wuhan in China was trying to contain the outbreak of a virus which would spread and change our lives beyond all recognition. You don't need me to remind you of the events since then. The new additions to our everyday language tell their own story. Social distancing, lockdown, tears, test and trace, coronavirus updates. Next slide, please. Face masks, hands, face, space, self-isolate, R-rate, COVIDiot, protect the NHS, and most chillingly of all, daily deaths. My thoughts and prayers are most especially with those approaching Christmas and the end of the year with an empty chair, having lost someone close, either directly through the virus or in another way. And there are so many. Many more have lost livelihoods and jobs too, as lives have been devastated. It's been a year when we've reconsidered our values. Nations have discovered that those who matter most aren't actually the rich, the famous, or the influential, but rather those key workers, another new phrase, doctors, nurses, teachers, shopkeepers, and many, many more. Those we'd perhaps taken for granted and now suddenly realised just how vital they are. It's been a year when we remembered who matters most. We've spent more time than ever before at home, with those nearest to us, in our bubbles, thankful for our homes and those around us, as we've endeavoured, most of us, to keep ourselves and one another safe and healthy. All the time we've had to stay awake and alert, a theme of Advent, of course. Awake and alert to the constantly changing landscape as rules and advice have been given and re-given time and time again. We've had to be flexible and obedient in ways we'd never before considered. And we've known for some time that Christmas would be different. Back in March, I asked on Facebook whether Santa would be considered a key worker, hoping to goodness it would be irrelevant some 9 months later. Sadly, it's been apparent for a while that this festive season would be subject to considerable restrictions. And then this last weekend everything changed again. What plans we'd made were torn up again with the rug pulled out from underneath Christmas. Journeys, visits have been cancelled in our family, just as no doubt they have been in yours. You know, it's not actually all that different from the first Christmas. We've heard the story so many times, it sounds so perfect, so coordinated, which in a way it was foreseen by the prophets many centuries before the Saviour of the world was to be born. In that sense, he was expected. But how it happened, well, that bit was not so expected. Mary and Joseph were planning to be married when events outside of their control changed all of that, just like for the 20 or so wedding couples here at St Leonard's this year. An angel appears to Mary and suddenly she's pregnant as a virgin, and along comes the uncertainty. Joseph's not the father, so will he even stay with her? How's it all going to pan out? What's going to happen? And then they're told they have to travel for some census. The government announces they must go home as the rug is pulled out from underneath their plans for the imminent birth, and the heavily pregnant Mary is forced to relocate, forced, in fact, to return home, which sounds vaguely familiar. Perhaps Christmas 2020 is not entirely unlike the first Christmas. It never was a nice, neat little story, but rather more chaotic, messier, more unexpected than we probably give it credit for. More human and yet more transcendent and awe-inspiring, more intimate and more divine, as indeed are all births. For at its heart, that's what it was, a birth. The birth of a baby uniquely human and divine. The God-child which would grow up to be the saviour of the world that countless millions of Christians, including me, would dedicate their lives to follow. The birth of hope and light. This Christmas, more perhaps than any other, is a time when we need hope and light. On one level, the light in the darkness of our COVID world